If you are not satisfied with a decision made by the Traffic and Parking Commission, you may appeal the decision by filing for a writ of certiorari with the Davidson County Chancery or Circuit Court. Your appeal must be filed within 60 days of the date of the entry of the Commission's decision. We advise that you seek your own independent legal advice to ensure that your appeal is filed in a timely manner and that all procedural requirements have been met. Okay. We can't approve anything, so Mr. Haggerty, we will go to the presentation on multi-way stop warrants.
All right, thank you. Corby, can you bring up that slide deck? All right, thank you. I'll start by introducing myself, Derek Haggerty, Nashville Department of Transportation. Today I've been asked to give a presentation on multi-way stop warrants, explaining what these are, how we use them with the Nashville Department of Transportation, and make a recommendation to this commission for how we process these going forward. Next slide, please. Next slide. All right, thank you. So what is a warrant? Really, this is a justification for the installation of a traffic control device, generally based on research. In transportation, most of this is based on the Federal Highway Administration standards. We also see a lot of research from ITE, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, which feeds into those recommendations. You'll typically see these used for traffic signals and multi-way stops in connection with this commission. We also use it internally for left turn phasing when we give that solid green arrow to vehicles making a left turn. All right, so why do we use this in Nashville? Simply comes from Metro Code, which requires us to follow the manual on uniform traffic control devices for streets and highways. This is an FHWA document and really lays out pretty much everything there is on signage, markings, and signals. The purpose of this document is to ensure uniformity across the entire country. So when you're driving in Nashville, a stop sign here looks like a stop sign in Portland, Oregon, or Austin, Texas. That's really where this all came out of. Over time, the document's grown quite a bit. It's probably about 4 inches thick, and everyone in our office has a copy on their desk. Used quite a bit. Next slide, please. All right, so a little more about that document. This, not only is it in Metro Code here, it is the federal standard. We also do have a version up at the state, which is slightly different than what the federal government uses. And this is because states can add to this document, not take away from. Really only impacts wayfinding signage, which not something we deal with on this commission. I will say this document is currently being revised. It is every 8 to 12 years. This is one of the longer stretches we've gone without a revision. Expecting that to come out probably next spring. This revision process is taking longer than typical because there has been so much public involvement, which is a great thing. And we do expect the warrants to change slightly once that new edition comes out, and we will provide an update to the commission at that time. Next slide, please. All right, so MUTCD guidance going in on multi-way stops. What you see on the screen here is what we see directly out of the book. So when are multi-way stops recommended? Part A you see here as an interim measure when a traffic signal is improved before it's able to be constructed. Traffic signal design and construction can take anywhere from 12 to 15 months. The design phase can take some time, and really the big factor there is ordering materials. Signal mast arms are in high demand. Generally takes us 6 months once we place an order to actually receive the materials, which drives that timeline. Because of that, we can put in an all-way stop as an interim measure, and it really depends on the geometry of the intersection. If we have large multi-lane sections, we don't like installing all-way stops in those conditions because it gets a little confusing to drivers as whose turn it is to go. But if we're looking at smaller streets, maybe with just a left turn lane, we'll consider that. So moving on, point B is one of the ones you'll hear us mention quite a bit. That's 5 or more reported crashes in a 12-month period that are susceptible to correction by a multi-way stop. So what we're generally looking at there are right turn and left turn collisions. And I'll get more into how we do this later, but if there's rear end side swipes, we generally don't count that towards this number unless we see something in the police report that leads us to think a stop sign could have prevented it. All right, and then minimum volumes besides crashes is the one that you'll see us reference most. And this is basically based on acceptable wait time and overall delay. We recognize that when you're leaving a side street onto a main street, sometimes you're gonna have to stop and yield to traffic. The question is, when does it justify stopping traffic on that main street at every single vehicle to allow that side traffic in? So the numbers that we've come up with, and as I mentioned, this is based on some research, but these are not hard and fast rules. So we say on the main street an average of at least 300 vehicles per hour for an 8-hour stretch. If we get a street where the average is 292 vehicles, we'll say, yeah, that's close enough. If it's 100 vehicles, obviously that's a lot lower. You have chances to get in from that main street. The minor street approach then is 200 units. So this is not only vehicles, but also pedestrians, bicyclists, anything else entering the street there. And then finally, if these are high-speed routes, so the 85th percentile approach speed exceeds 40 miles an hour, and that just means that 15% of vehicles are going 40 miles or faster, then those numbers are lowered by 70%. So on that main approach, we'd be looking for 210 vehicles and looking for 140 on the minor approach. That's basically saying that when cars are going faster, you have less time to turn out there. That approach speed is quicker, so we need some more gaps in there to allow for that. Next slide, please. Now, there's also an option section, which going forward, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on. These are other criteria that are not necessarily just quantitative measures, but kind of qualitative measures that we as engineers and engineer technicians look for at these locations. So the first one, the need to control left turn conflicts. If we have an area where left turn conflicts are a real issue, all-way stops can be considered. Also, high pedestrian areas, you see this a lot. In the downtown area, we've actually gone to signals more often, but a similar warrant process there. Maybe we don't have the vehicle numbers to meet those warrants, but with the high volumes of pedestrians, it makes sense to have those in, encourage that movement. We also have sight distance. If we're at a section where from that minor approach, you cannot see approaching vehicles to safely enter the main street, that's also an opportunity for an all-way stop. And then finally, when we have 2 residential neighborhood collectors, and just to explain the vocabulary a little bit, in Nashville we have 3 levels of streets. Local streets, which are what you'll typically see in a residential neighborhood, that's on the lower end. On the higher end, we have arterials. Those are meant to move traffic really quickly from point A to point B. So anything in Nashville with Pike in its name is probably an arterial. And then collectors are kind of the in-between one, meant to connect traffic between those smaller streets to those larger ones. So whenever 2 collectors of equal or near equal volume meet, we consider that for an all-way stop also. And that's really because those road characteristics are so similar. Excuse me. It's difficult for drivers to determine who should have the right of way. What signs are really intended for is to reinforce driver behavior. They're not always great at changing that behavior, but if we can reinforce to drivers that this is a safe thing to be doing at this location, on this street, that's what signage is useful for. If we're looking to change driver behavior, that's when we look for more of those physical changes that we install through some of our other programs. All right, and then talking a little bit about, why we follow these warrants. So we got some cons and pros for unwarranted stop sign installation. I'm going to say most of this research took place in the 80s and 90s. Right now at the PhD level, you don't see a lot of research done with all-way stops or stop signs in general. I will talk a little bit about some research being done in cities as part of their Vision Zero efforts, but just want to make sure everyone realizes that this research, we believe, is still valid, but it has not taken place in the last 5 to 10 years. Oh, sorry, can you go back? Thank you. So one, we see that they do not control speeds over distance. Drivers will come up to a stop sign, stop, make up for lost time as they go past. And the reason we got the picture of the bird here is the bird's wing pattern is kind of the typical speed profile that we see, almost kind of a V effect. So vehicles are going fast, they get to the stop sign, stop for that little stretch, and then they hit the gas, get right back up to speed there. So, if you're that 1 or 2 houses right next to the intersection, you might see that slowing. If you're past there, not really going to have an impact. Unwarranted stop signs in urban areas have also led to higher pedestrian crash rates, and they result in overall lower compliance. Most of us probably know of a stop sign that gets run quite a bit. Most times those are unwarranted because, as we mentioned, those signs are really meant to reinforce driver behavior. So if a driver's coming through here all the time, says, hey, I never see any traffic coming off to the side there, well, the first 1 or 2 times they might stop. After that, people start rolling through, and sometimes you get people that just speed right through. Now, obviously not all drivers are running those, but it does happen more frequently with these unwarranted stops. Next slide, please. All right, and then going on to the pros. Intersections with sight distance issues, they do reduce crashes, even if they are unwarranted by those, those crash numbers and minimum volume numbers. They do also reduce crashes involving parked cars. And the research is a little iffy on why that is, but it is a correlation that's been noted. It also makes residents feel safer. So even if the numbers don't back it up, residents do feel safer with a control device there. And I think that's something we see a lot, not just at NDOT, but also at this commission. And then finally, and it's kind of a pro and a con depending on if you live on the street or not, but enough stop signs can push traffic off the street onto other routes. So if there is a street you want to protect and you're fine with the overflow, that is a method that's been used before. And Google Maps is actually transitioning some of their routing information to lower the environmental impact, which means they'll be looking for routes with fewer stop signs where you have that stop and start motion. So that's just something to keep in mind going forward, that where we put stop signs could have a pretty large impact on how vehicles are routed throughout the city. All right, so going forward, I did want to talk about some more recent research that we've had out there. The Washington, D.C. Department of Transportation, as part of their Vision Zero initiative, actually did a little test study here, putting out 53 all-way stops at previously unwarranted intersections. Before I go too far into this, a lot of times in Nashville, our comparison cities will be places like Washington, D.C., Seattle, Austin, where the populations are similar, kind of thought of as similar cities. But due to our area, we typically have a much less dense population. So Washington, D.C. has a density, I think, 10 to 12 times as great as ours, which does change traffic patterns quite a bit. The majority of neighborhoods in Nashville are suburban style. I would say outside of District 19 and maybe a couple others, we're really a suburban area. So when we're looking at this DC study, just have to realize that this is very much an urban context. So what they saw there, significant reductions in right angle crashes and increases in pedestrian crashes. Most of the others, they didn't see any real change in. And just want to go back to heavily urban area, you probably do have much more pedestrian traffic, and vehicle traffic's probably moving at lower speeds. So, some context to keep in mind, but it does really back up with what some of that research was saying, 30, 40 years ago. So because of that, the DC Department of Transportation has opted to continue to use the FHWA warrants. And a few other cities have used this study as a basis to do the same and really shift their focus from signage and markings more to physical design in the pursuit of Vision Zero, which I think is the goal of most cities. Obviously, economics plays an impact in that as well. So next slide, please. Now I just want to talk a little bit about how we at NDOT handle the requests that come in. So, just to be upfront about it, we do have 3 engineering technicians, including Corby, who's, helps us out at all these meetings here, that review over 2,500 yearly requests that come in through Hub Nashville. And this is everything traffic related, from signs, markings, signals, speeding, anything you can imagine. Excuse me. So, as you can imagine, they see this a lot, and our staff is very experienced. Corby, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been here, 15, 20 years? Yep, and he's the newest member of our team. So a lot of experience out there. They've all seen these a lot, and they have a really good eye, which is beneficial for us. So when we receive a multi-way stop request, the first thing that we do is pull the crash records. We keep a GIS database just showing locations of all the crashes in the county. This goes back to, I would say our records are pretty good, going back about 15 years, and we do have records of varying quality going back about 25 years. Now, we typically only look going about 3-4 years back. And we'll also conduct a site visit. Like I said, our technicians are pretty experienced. When they're on site, they can get a good feel for volumes and really determine if we need to take the next step, or if we're just in a really sleepy residential neighborhood. So, if after looking at those crash records, being out on site, we determine, hey, we need a little more information to make an educated decision here, we can request a traffic study where we will go out, do counts, collect those volumes, or we can pull the individual MNPD police records and really get in the weeds there, determine if there are crashes that could be susceptible to improvement with all-way stops. And we do use MNPD's ARM system, which has the crash records in there. In the packet today, you do have just the narrative page of that. Those are typically 5 to 9 page documents, most of it driver information, but that narrative is really what we're looking at. So following that information, our technicians will make a recommendation to the traffic engineer, and that is generally what we'll reply back to the citizen with or pass along to commission. So today we sit here with one recommendation. Director DeMassimo, is now over NDOT here, and she really wants to make sure we're focused on a data-driven approach and meeting residents on site to resolve issues. So what we're asking of the commission today and moving forward is that any appeals made regarding multi-way stops, the decision be deferred 1 month after the presentation to allow us time to work with residents on a solution that we believe will have a greater effect on their area, and just allow for more time and consideration of the question. So we've already started working with 1 or 2 neighborhoods. Don't have finished products yet, but we hope to share those with the commission once we have answers in place. Next slide, please. You can go through to the questions. All right, and that concludes the presentation. I'll open it up to any questions.
Questions? Yes, council member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Derek. This is really good. And I mean, again, after 2 years on the commission, sometimes these staff deep dives continue to be very helpful. I guess, right, like most district council members, I represent a number of residential neighborhoods, and I think I'd be hard-pressed to find a residential neighborhood in the city of Nashville that was looking to increase speeds on neighborhood streets, right? I mean, I think there is maybe less discomfort with traffic moving on the streets we commonly know as arterials, collectors, just the major streets. But inside neighborhoods, I think most people prefer to see people driving. We've all seen the signs that say "Drive like you live here," or "Drive like your kids play here," that kind of thing. I appreciate what you're saying on the Vision Zero front. I think it's a tough balance because most of us have the experience that with the data, to your point, I know that residents feel safer, but we also know the intersections in the community, and sometimes there is more context. I'll be interested to see as we go forward with the recommendations, and if we kind of move to a system of a deferral and working with folks. We still have such a limited volume of acceptances into the kind of the traffic calming program through open enrollment that, District 19, for instance, didn't have a single accepted application, and we haven't in a couple years. If we're trying to really move toward Vision Zero, and we know we have a kind of a bottleneck on the traffic calming front, how do we reconcile that volume of stop signs with the approaches that you all are able to take?
Great question. So obviously right now, NDOT is in the process of staffing up with engineers. We just brought one on board our traffic calming program last week, and we'll have another joining our development services team next week. Excuse me. I do just want to say I did get a COVID test yesterday. I'm negative, so please excuse my coughs. I'll pull it up on my phone for you later. So we are staffing up. We also have a traffic safety engineer position being advertised too. But what we're trying to do internally, the traffic calming program, those projects are funded at about $50,000 a piece. So we are building what I would call a mini traffic calming toolbox of more cost-effective solutions that we can deploy rapidly with little engineering oversight into our residential neighborhoods to replace the multi-way stop request. And it's going to take us probably another month or two and some trial and error to develop what we think is a pretty good toolbox, but that's one of the approaches we're looking at going forward.
So I guess the follow-up to me is just thinking again about the neighborhood I live in. And not all neighborhoods are like this, but I think if you made a distinction, there's probably a boundary at which this starts to depart from the pattern, but you could think of it as either UZO and outside the UZO, USD, GSD. Sometimes you've got a sort of more of a cul-de-sac pattern to a neighborhood. Sometimes you have more of a grid. I mean, in our neighborhood, I guess, for those streets that may fit the profile of a cut-through, right, versus where they're just literally connecting people from their driveways to a street that would get you, whether it's a highway or other collector, would move you around the city. If you're just in the neighborhood, I'm just trying to understand the logic of the evidence of warranted stops aside, or even taking that into account is actually a better way to think of it. And knowing the lack of research, what's sort of the rationale by which you would want people to be able to drive for multiple city blocks without a stop sign in the context of a residential neighborhood?
Yeah, sure. So, when would we want vehicles to continue on over longer distances without stopping? I think from an environmental standpoint, that's something we'd always want, those vehicles to travel in at low speeds. And then, going back to the study, once you have people getting to the point where they feel comfortable rolling through or not stopping at stop signs, that's when it can become really dangerous with expectations from that minor street, with pedestrians or drivers pulling out, expecting that person to stop on the main line, and it not happening.
So then, I guess maybe that's part of it too, is so in a lot of the context, for instance, again, just thinking down to the specifics of a single neighborhood, so many of those intersections lack the kind of the safe crossing infrastructure, right? You could imagine, right, the crosswalks that themselves are almost pillowed, right, those kinds of things. If you had those throughout a neighborhood, it's harder to fly through those and ignore the stop sign because you're kind of impeded a little bit by the infrastructure. I mean, is that the kind of thing where we think we're going to, are you able to anticipate some of the improvements that we're going to see at an increasing number of intersections in the city?
Right now, it'd probably be a little early in the process for me to say that. I think we're looking at a lot of vertical delineation, looking at possible of bringing art into the right-of-way, kind of some of that placemaking. But I think what we also have to realize is in a lot of our neighborhoods now, you mentioned the non-cut-throughs. We still have a lot of non-residents going into those areas as we rely more and more on deliveries for food items, lawn services, and all those people, they're prioritizing how long it takes them to get in and out of the neighborhood. So it's an interesting time in transportation, especially in these residential neighborhoods who are now seeing more traffic, as a result of our own habits in the neighborhood. So it's, I don't think there's ever going to be an easy solution to this. Part of it, as residents, I get quite a few calls about lawn services speeding, delivery drivers speeding, and now whether this is them actually speeding or it's the perception that it's an outsider in there, that is something that we do have a little control over with those. But so it's almost gotten to the point where, we definitely have cut-throughs that see more volume, but in those residential neighborhoods that are not cut-throughs, we're still seeing that outside traffic really being invited into the neighborhood. So,
and there you mean specifically things like deliveries,
absolutely,
ride sharing, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. 5 years ago, we'd go to Walmart, go to Kroger for what we needed, and now that's all coming to us, which is increasing that traffic in residential neighborhoods and focusing on those drivers who are looking to get in and out as quick as possible. So it's become more convenient, but there's also safety concerns that have come along with it. Now, I will say a lot of those companies have great safety records at all, so I don't want to say they're responsible for an increase in crashes, fatalities, anything like that, but I think it is responsible for an increased perception of safety in our neighborhoods.
John,
Yes.
Thank you very much, Derek. My years of sitting on this commission, I've seen neighborhood people come with their council person because they're frustrated, and a four-way stop seems to be the only thing they can do to slow things down so that their kids feel safe, sidewalks are usable. They can't stop people from using their street because it's a faster way to get to where they're going. So I think this is all really great, but, when people are frustrated, and that's what the four-way stops seem to be, is the last solution. I wish I could say people are obeying the speed limit, but that seems optional in Nashville. So anyway, we'll see how it goes. It sounds really great.
No, absolutely, and thank you for the comments. And I obviously receive the same calls that everyone on commission here does, and and we're aware of it. And you have seen increased resources for the traffic calming program. Obviously, it's a program that's been dormant for about 20 years, so it is going to take time to catch up to demand. But we have more funding dedicated this year than we probably have over the past 20 years. We'll be having projects in 75 neighborhoods over the next 9 months. So that there is real progress, but it is going to take time for these systems and really the changes in thought process of where we want to invest in transportation to be out there on the street.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Haggerty. Thank you very much. I'll just make one comment, my editorial comment, that would be hopefully some of the other departments and folks that have input into good street design can be part of this, because a lot of times the problem with why you need all-way stops or some other bad solutions is because you have a bad street design. And I think if we get some better street design, it can help with other.
Yeah, and just to comment on that, I do want to say our development services team is really leaning into more of a NACTO approach. So I think in the new subdivisions that are popping up along the edges of the county, you're going to see that. But Nashville is 500 square miles. That's been built up for over 100 years now. It's not going to change overnight.
And I think your magic wand is broken just like mine. So, okay. So, good news is we now have a quorum, and we'll proceed with the action items on our agenda. Thank you for that presentation, very helpful. We look forward to more. We need a motion for approval of today's agenda.
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have first and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Looking for a motion for approval of the minutes of the August 9th meeting. We have a first, is there a second?
Second.
We have a first and a second, all in favor? Okay, that's been approved. Approval of consent agenda. Please note that items on the consent agenda will be voted on at a single time. No individual public hearing will be held, nor will the commission debate these items unless a member of the audience or the commission requests that the items be removed from the consent agenda. It's my understanding that item D and E we have a request to remove those.
Correct.
Okay.
Councilmember Sledge has requested that those be removed and deferred for 1 month.
Okay, all right.
A is okay, though?
Yes, he did not mention any objections.
All right, so are there any other items? If not, we need a motion to remove item D and E from the consent agenda, please.
So moved.
All right, and your request needs to include a indefinite deferral. Okay, we have a motion for removal and indefinite deferral. Is there a second?
It was
Second.
one meeting, right, I think?
What?
I think it was a deferral for one
Was it
meeting.
one meeting or, okay, my apologies. Okay. Council member, if you'll. make sure
Yeah,
we're clear.
move to remove D and E for a 1 month deferral, and then otherwise approve the consent agenda.
Okay, all right, so is there a second to that motion?
But before we do that, item number C, is this one of those items which you're speaking that you would wish that we would defer for one meeting?
So item C is a three-legged intersection that currently has no traffic control devices. This would just install a stop sign on the minor approach. The 1 month deferral we are requesting would be for multi-way stops specifically.
Okay, all right. So is there a second on the council member's motion?
Second.
We have a second, okay. First and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right, so I will read the modified consent agenda. Item A is a mandatory referral 2021M011AB001, a request for the abandonment of the right-of-way along alley number 403 from 8th Avenue South westward to alley number 404 between South Street and Archer Street. Easement right to be retained, requested by Kroll Capital Partners, GP. Item B is mandatory referral 2021M014AB001, a request to authorize the abandonment of an unimproved, unnamed right-of-way off Old Matthews Road. The easement is also proposed to be abandoned from Old Matthews Road between 2643 and 2647 Old Matthews Road, the northernmost to the dead end, requested by Vicky Vaughn. Item C is a authorized stop control on Jackson Views Road at the intersection with Jackson Valley Road, requested by Donna Reynolds. Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as read?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a first and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Not opposed. Okay. The next item on the agenda is deferred business item A, a parking meter removal. It's my understanding there's been a request to defer this indefinitely. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so can someone make a motion to indefinitely defer parking meter removal? Item A.
So moved, although I do have discussion once we get a second.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a first and a second. Okay, councilmember, discussion.
Just so I understand, is that a staff recommendation for indefinite deferral?
It is, correct. And just to provide a little detail for it, our development services has not yet gone through final plan approval. There's currently a turn lane on the plan set, which would necessitate the removal of the meters. That turn lane is still up for debate.
I guess I think I heard from the applicant that they may have somebody here today. Is it possible to see if there's somebody to speak to that? I don't know if that's, Mr. Chair, if that's possible.
Yes, yes, please step forward, state your name. Yes, have a seat. Make yourself at home.
Hey, Dr. Strowski, KCI Technologies, 5539 Metropolitan.
Okay.
So,
Turn your mic on, please.
There you go.
There you go.
learn something new every day. Do I need to say my name again? No? Do you want me to say my name again and all of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, Beth Ostrowski, KCI Technologies, traffic engineer, 5539 Knob Road.
And I guess, I think I had contact with the project team between the initial application. I just want to make sure, if staff recommends indefinite deferral and this item were to come back later potentially, is there a reason the team needs it now?
Yeah, so I actually was a little confused by this graphic. This is the first time I've seen this. My understanding is it would actually be the west side of Chet Atkins, north end of Chet Atkins on the west side of 19th, which is where the project site actually is. Derek, maybe you can, I don't know if you know if there was a typo in that request, or we did not submit the request, the contractor did. However, the traffic impact study recommended and under preliminary SP approved the eastbound approach of Chet Atkins at 19th to have a 2-lane approach. So that approach would be widened to 3 lanes, it would be 3 lanes of travel. And in order to accomplish that, it would remove the on-street parking on the north side of Chet Atkins. In addition, there's a driveway and a loading zone there, which just by the spacing, there isn't really a logical place to put a parking space anymore.
And am I understanding you to be saying that the map is indicated where the yellow highlight is not actually where the request for removal of parking spaces is?
That's my understanding, because that's not the project site. That's an existing building today.
And I don't know, I mean, Derek, maybe a 1-meeting deferral to resolve this with the applicant, because if the contractor maybe submitted it off a block and it turns out otherwise it would be okay at the actual project site, we may want to just understand that before we do an indefinite deferral, if that makes sense.
Absolutely agreed.
Okay, then, Mr. Chair, I guess I would update my motion to a 1-meeting deferral and allow the applicant to continue working with staff on this request.
All right, so we have a modified motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a first and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Okay. New business items. There's a whole series of these business items that seem to relate to, the first 3 relate to Vanderbilt University request. New business item A is parking meter removal, authorized removal of 24 parking meters along Chess Neely Drive between Natchez Trace and 25th Avenue, requested by Vanderbilt University. Item B is parking meter removal along 29 parking meters along West End Avenue from 2305 West End Avenue to 25th Avenue South. And then item C is parking meter installation, authorize the installation of 53 parking meters along Vanderbilt Place from 28th Avenue to 31st Avenue South, requested by Vanderbilt. And I know the council member of the district, Mr. Cash, is here. Thank you for coming. There are folks from Vanderbilt here. Okay. Why don't we do this? Why don't y'all make your presentation, and then we'll have a discussion. Thank you for coming.
Does this work? Oh, great. Well, good afternoon. My name is Alfred DeGraff Reed. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Local Government Relations at Vanderbilt University, and I'm very pleased to be here in person. I know we've done quite a few of these over the last 2 years virtually. So, Mr. Chair and members of the Traffic and Parking Commission, thank you for this opportunity for us to present today. I have a very easy job, which is to introduce my colleague, Mr. Michael Briggs, who is no stranger to Metro, who's going to go through the presentation for us. So I just wanted to quickly introduce myself and thank you all for this opportunity.
Thank you. As Alfred mentioned, I'm Michael Briggs, the Assistant Director of Mobility at Vanderbilt. And we actually had a pretty good recap that the chairman went over. And so the first slide here just recaps that. And I appreciate this opportunity to come forward, because it's not often we get to work on maybe some projects that come out of Move VU and Future VU that help our long-range land use and transportation and mobility plans. And so this is what you're capturing today is a small part of a lot of the strategies and solutions we have to improve campus over a number of years. And so we're excited to go over some information that we presented to you probably about a year ago related to Just Neely and give an update there, and then think through strategically how we essentially relocate existing parking meters that are in a couple of locations onto Vanderbilt Place. So the request is, as you mentioned before, is to relocate meters on Just Neely Drive, also on West End Avenue, and put these meters on Vanderbilt Place, where there's currently about 72 on-street parking spaces that are unmetered and utilized today. Next slide. So this is the exact location that we're talking about on West End. It's in front of the Zippos College, which is the new residential college on the corner of 25th and West End. It's also in front of what's labeled here as RCB, or it's now Rothschild's Residential College. And then the Carmichael 1 and 2 towers were imploded just a few weeks ago. And so there's construction activity both in front of Rothschild and then where Residential College C will be on West End. And so our request there is to remove the 29 on-street parking meter spaces. On Just Neely, which we worked with you all to study a bike lane pilot, it's 24 on-street parking meter spaces. And then these would be reallocated onto Vanderbilt Place between Natchez Trace and 31st Avenue. So specifically with Just Neely, wanted to report some data back to you all since we talked about this last year. The bike lane pilot was between 25th Avenue and Natchez Trace, directly by the football stadium and baseball stadiums on the north side. So where you see the on-street parking there on the north side, those were removed for the spring semester. Next slide. You all granted this pilot approval, and so the on-street parking meters are bagged during that time, so no parking was allowed, and we had signs posted indicating the bike lane pilot. We also provided ways to get input during that time in case there were any issues that popped up that we needed to be aware of on Just Neely. Next slide. Here's some data that we gathered. In the late spring semester, we actually were able to set up a camera to watch the whole block over a 1-week period. We lost some data and some mornings, so it's not exactly complete, but it gives you an idea of how many pedestrians, the number of bicyclists that were coming through during those 32 hours. And so it obviously has a pretty high pedestrian activity that we were seeing, and it was pretty interesting to watch just the movements of people in the space and how people would just cross, and it wasn't random, it was in a similar space, but where there was no crosswalk in between McGugin and the football and baseball stadiums. And so we got really good information from that. Next slide. So this just in a diagram shows specifically involving the bicyclists, how many we counted. And occasionally you get a bicyclist or a scooter that's on a sidewalk, so those were included. And so it just shows how many we had in the travel lanes versus the bike lane. And this informs some of our thinking too as to whether or not it ends up being a bike lane or that's in both directions, or like it is on when we tested it onto one side of the street. So what we're trying to do is to use this information to inform a future design. We currently have no funding to do that, but we do feel that the on-street parking, that worked really well, having that bagged. We didn't receive any complaints and very few questions about it. It works really well for athletics, which has a number of events that have to be staged in that area, and it fits within the future VU and move VU and our master planning efforts. Then shifting gears a bit on the West End, this issue is related to construction that continues to occur. So we've had major construction projects involving each of the residential colleges, and so we're now moving on to the third residential college that will be facing West End. What we're interested here is to remove the meters, but we're also wanting to start a broader discussion too about the future street design on the street. So that's why we've only requested up to essentially our admissions office, because we're not 100% confident that removing all of the parking at this point in time is a good idea or feasible. But it takes kind of one additional factor out of the street design at the moment while construction is underway. And so really our goals of this request is to generate parking turnover along a street where people are tending to park most of the day. We want people to be parking compliant and parking in the lots, both on the medical center and university side. And so we know on Vanderbilt Place, there's a number of people that are parking there, and they are leaving their cars all day. And they're avoiding parking in the Vanderbilt spots that we have for them and that they can get permits for. We're also wanting to create greater parking compliance, and this impacts the revenue for the city. We know as you get closer in to campus, which where Jess Neely is right now and on West End, that's probably a lot harder to enforce, just given the Jess Neely location being interior and West End having a lot of traffic on it. And then we want to also make sure that we are informing both our long-range campus plans and then working with the city on any future plans as well. So that's our request, and I think you all have it divided up into 3 different action items, and I'm happy to take questions.
Questions from commissioners? Yeah, I have a question. On West End Avenue, or maybe some clarification, on West End Avenue, from where is there currently parking from Natchez Trace down to 21st? Isn't there parking in front of the, I call it the commercial building, the high-rise building? And then is there parking down as you get from past the entrance to Kirkland Hall down to 21st? It seems like, I can't remember, it seems like we had some request to remove parking meters on a section of West End. So I'm just trying to get some clarification of how this fits into the total pattern on West End Avenue, please.
And I'll actually defer to Ms. Marshall.
I have a little bit of background on this too, and this goes back, Mr. Chair, to my time on the Nashville MTA Board of Directors as well. This is a Vanderbilt-specific proposal. There was a time when I believe this commission was at least asked to review some plans that would have looked at reconfiguration of that stretch of West End for being more of a transit corridor. There is metered parking for a lengthy stretch there that runs along the West End boundary of Vanderbilt's campus, but this request is just for removal of a small number of spaces of that whole stretch. But yeah, there is on-street metered parking both along the commercial district opposite Vanderbilt for most of that stretch and also for Vanderbilt.
And is Vanderbilt Place, is that a street that Vanderbilt owns and controls, or is that still a city street? I know Jess Neely is under your control. Is that?
No, Jess Neely and Vanderbilt Place. The portion of Vanderbilt Place west of Natchez Trace are public streets. They're metro streets.
Okay. Are there any other questions, comments from commissioners? Council member, is there anything you'd like to add?
I would.
Yes, please.
Right. I my main concern is that, right now on Vanderbilt Place, there's free parking. And it is pretty close up to some residential permit parking and street parking across 31st. I know Belport and Akron on the east side of Nashville and Little Blakemore, I think some of 32nd, and Belport on the west side of 32nd, Nashville, do have permit parking. So I'm concerned that when these free spaces go away, that they're going to start looking for more parking in the neighborhood on those residential permit parking streets. And so I guess I'm asking, or I have concern that there's not enough fairly regular enforcement of the permit parking, that those streets are going to get overwhelmed and in a way that they don't expect, because they don't do the process of getting the residential permit parking. So that's my concern. I've talked to Mr. Hagerty about, making sure when this takes place, that there's some good enforcement that can take place. I've had, as Councilman O'Connell knows, as we were talking about the new RFP for new meters, that I and others had some concerns about the consistency of enforcement for residential permit parking and 2-hour parking, basically enforcement for non-metered parking stations. And Ms. Marshall was afraid if we asked, hey, can you send somebody over and kind of, get them on this street or ticket on this street to let them know that we're watching. She's afraid about that, but I think, the number of enforcers we have outside of downtown is like one, maybe. So that's an ongoing concern of mine, and it's even enhanced a little bit by this proposal. So I think the proposal itself is fine, but I want to make sure that the residential streets don't get overwhelmed with people looking for places that they really had one before and it's gone. And I'll also add that Vanderbilt has been great about reaching out to me. I've had several conversations with them, and I appreciate the way that they understand that they don't want this to impact city revenues in terms of having the same number of meters, and I believe that they are willing to pay, a reasonable cost to help move the meters from one place to another, and I appreciate that thoughtfulness on their part, but that's my main concern.
Thank you.
I'd ask for some input.
All right, council member.
Mr. Chair, and Mr. Cash, don't go too far, because I have a question for you just to make sure I understand. I understand the concern, and I think I, as your colleague on council, and I imagine commissioners and staff here will want to work to address your concern, but are you overall comfortable with Vanderbilt's proposal? Like, you would be comfortable with us moving this forward and sort of a, hey, let's approve, but let's follow up with some conditions maybe?
I guess I wonder about the long-term implications of West End. I'm not sure about that, or to what extent, especially when I was talking about like there's going to be construction across from.
Right.
Like if both of those things are happening at the same time, I have some concerns about how many lanes are going to be taken from West End. In terms of conditions, but like making sure that there's some metro enforcement to get those who are parking where they're not supposed to be, which is my main concern. And like I said, I'm really happy with their plans for Jeff.
So I guess I just want to make sure we, as a commission, we would not be doing this with your objection, right? I mean, I do understand the concern about West End. I'll also say one of the reasons I was pretty insistent on inclusion of that corridor in the transportation plan that the mayor presented was specifically to make sure that we didn't lose the opportunity to give it a serious infrastructure focus. So my hope is that that plan and the study that's coming out that will include some TDOT funding will help address that. I don't know if that's enough to kind of give voice to your concerns.
I guess my concern is, again, when we revisit metered parking, and I think I got some assurances from the department that when we have metered parking that can do some of the things for itself, and it doesn't have to have both, personnel
guess I'm trying to make sure, obviously, this is a proposal to approve these changes. I want to make sure we would not be doing so in contrast to your overall feeling about traffic and parking if we were to approve it today.
I am not about, I support this plan.
Okay.
Okay.
My only concern is how it impacts the residential students in the neighborhood.
Okay. May I ask a question
it.
of Vanderbilt? Okay. Have y'all done any kind of study analysis, your sense of the cars that park on Vanderbilt Place? Are they Vanderbilt employees trying to avoid paying for a sticker? Are they working on West End? I mean, is there any kind of sense of where these cars are originating from? And obviously, people love free parking.
I will say that, I think that's kind of, I will say that it is filled up pretty early in the morning, so I kind of don't think it's a lot of West End employees, because they don't tend to open up that early. I think it's just more Vanderbilt University, honestly, more than medicine.
Yeah, so we have not done a study to, like, exactly understand who it is that's parking there, but my hunch would be the same, is that it's university or medical center staff or students that are parking in there. We do have, like, right in that area is mostly medical center parking, so there's a good number of medical center staff that park in those lots there, and then there's a shuttle that picks them up fairly regularly and takes them over to the hospital. And so I would say it's probably,
I drive through that area probably 25 times a week, and it seems like your surface lot has plenty of parking. Is that
yeah,
correct?
that's correct,
Okay.
yeah. There's plenty of parking spaces on Vanderbilt property to accommodate those cars.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, is there any other questions? Yes?
Is it possible to approve this and with a caveat that we can quickly approve more residential permit parking if needed? I mean, and you all know the answers better than I do. If someone comes out, their driveway's blocked, how do they get that car moved so they can leave? How, is that something we get to call our friends at Metro Police? Or is it up to the person to?
That would be a dispatched call. I couldn't comment about what the time frame to getting somebody out there. It's just going to depend on how high that call is prioritized. But that would be a towable offense if they're blocking a driveway, yeah.
So is that up to you to, I mean, as the police to call the tow truck? Is that going to be incumbent on the resident?
Well, a tow truck's not going to, if it's on private property, if they pull up and block the driveway in the driveway and it's on private property, then the resident who owns that property can have it towed.
But if it's on the street?
But if it's on a street blocking it, then it's going to need to be ticketed and towed. So that's where they'd have to call the non-emergency 862-8600 number and have an officer dispatched out there.
It's my understanding from working in that area for many years, that's what's going to happen. You know, people do love them some free parking, but I know we passed a lot of residential parking before, and perhaps there's a need to be sensitive when that comes in front of us in the future about the neighborhoods.
The only other option other than us would be the parking enforcement folks who have the authority to ticket those vehicles and have them towed. But like you said, I think there's five of those currently.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Council member?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. That maybe this is an appropriate thing. What if we move to have Vanderbilt's Move VU program come back with staff in a year and provide the commission kind of an update with some analysis of the impact of this so that we could figure out if a response was necessary to address Mr. Cash's concerns? Would that work?
I would. That's kind of what we did with Jess Neely. We came back kind of
Yeah,
6 months, 9 months later. Is that correct, Mr. Briggs?
Yes, that's correct. We're happy to do that. I think it will take some coordination with the city to really understand what's happening in the residential streets, since that's kind of beyond our purview.
I mean, Derek, I know Vanderbilt is obviously a significant institution. Would it make sense, like, are you all in a position as staff that you could do some coordination and bring back some analysis?
We would absolutely need Vanderbilt to take the lead on that study, but we'd be happy to assist in providing resources that we had available.
Would either of you object to an approval with a follow-up analysis?
Yeah, I think we're good with that.
All right, then, Mr. Chair, I move to approve and request that Vanderbilt and Public Works come back, and I would say a year, because I think this is, Michael, am I correct? This will happen over a period of several months. This is not going to be like we approve it and y'all go do it next week, right?
Yeah, that would be my guess, because we'll have to work with the city on the actual meter relocation.
So is a year seem like a right time frame?
I would think so.
Let's just say a year, because I think that'll give us enough time for all the moving parts to settle down.
Second.
All right, so we have a motion to approve item A, B, and C with a condition of a follow-up study within a year. Is that correct, Mr. Councilmember?
That is correct.
Okay. One last question before we have a first and a second. One last question. How does Vanderbilt do street enforcement? I know y'all are police, and I know you give speeding tickets and you stop people, et cetera. So how do you all work with Metro Police and the traffic on these kind of issues? Y'all are much closer to this area.
So on the parking front, we have community service officers that do citations on Vanderbilt-owned property and lots. Typically, the sworn police officers are responsible for patrolling the campus, and then if they do see driving infractions, they do have the ability to pull people over and cite them. And I'd have to defer to our Metro Police as well as to how that coordination goes between VUPD and Metro Police.
The police, Vanderbilt's police powers are granted through Chief Drake. They should have just like they have the power to stop cars on their property that are speeding, even though it might be a Metro-owned street. They also have the power to arrest in certain circumstances on the campus. They should be able to ticket and tow cars as well.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that clarification. All right. We've first and a second. Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Passed. Thank you all for coming and working with us. The item we're going to do next is, because the police officer, Mr. Rogers, Officer Rogers has been waiting patiently, is item E, which is a conversion of metered parking to loading zone and no parking. Authorize the removal of 11 meters on the south side of Broadway between 5th Avenue South and 6th Avenue South, and authorize the installation of a loading zone on Broadway 60 feet east of 6th Avenue South to 130 feet east of 6th Avenue South, and a no parking zone 130 feet east of 6th Avenue South to 5th Avenue South, requested by the Metro Nashville Police Department, and this is in your district, council member.
So I'll go ahead and move approval just so we can get to discussion.
Okay. Is there a second? Second. We have a first and a second. Discussion.
And then can we get staff to maybe, I don't know if a map is available on this one, but.
Corby, is there a map?
Yeah. Or Bridgestone, yeah.
It's the convention center.
It's
It's
Bridgestone.
Bridgestone.
I'm sorry.
Corby, if you just pull the slide down.
Wrong building.
It's on there. Right in front of Bridgestone.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe just ask either staff or MMPD for an update about the nature of the request. And I think I understand it, but I do want to understand if there was a specific prompt for it.
Sure, I'll give the staff update, and then we'll let Lieutenant Rogers pitch in. I think this has kind of come from him or come through him in partnership with a few of the nearby locations. So we really see this as a way to improve traffic flow in the area, create loading zone spaces, and really ease the staff time that goes into all the special events down there when we're constantly bagging, unbagging meters. On the flip side of that, though, these meters do generate revenue for the city, over $5,000 back in 2019. So we just want the commission to weigh the traffic flow impacts, loading zone impacts, special events versus the revenue.
So I would ask Derek, would this fall under the CORD program in terms of loading zone? Would it be able to be added to that?
So currently with the CORD program, we are staying off of Broadway.
Okay.
But in the future, if that program does expand, this would absolutely be open for consideration.
Got it. All right, thank you. So this would be traditional loading zone with signage as appropriate?
Correct.
Okay. And I will say, as the presiding council member, I'm comfortable with the request, but I appreciate staff's recognition of the revenue implications.
Okay. Okay.
I think with Fifth and Broadway and just the overall changes to that area, I think this is a sensible request.
Okay. All right, we have a first and a second. Is there any further discussion?
Would this help with pedestrian safety through there, do you think?
It's hard to say. Derek may have an opinion, I'm not sure. I think other signalized improvements there probably have helped some. There is a new traffic signal at the Fifth and Broadway location that includes signalization across the parking entrance to Fifth and Broadway. Crossing Broadway itself has always been a challenge through that stretch at its busiest time. So we've had a separate project that Derek has participated in with Hume Fog and dismissal. So it's looking at pedestrian safety, and that entire stretch is definitely in active consideration right now.
Is the loading zone going to include pedestrian loading and unloading, or passenger loading and unloading, or is it?
You mean like ride share, that kind of thing?
Yeah. The intention is just for traditional freight loading and unloading.
Okay.
I was going to follow up with parents dropping their children off at Hume Fog. Can they stop there to let them out?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Can parents stop there to let their children out or pick them up at Hume Fog? Their students are there.
Yeah, if this is converted into a loading zone and no parking zone, they would not be able to.
Okay.
That said, we are looking at some other options for kind of dismissal.
All right. Okay. Is there any further discussion or question? We have a first and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? It's been approved. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. All right, item D is a conversion of metered parking to loading zone, authorized removal of 1 meter and installation of a loading zone 20 feet east of 2111 Belcourt Avenue, requested by Kathy Hadley of Posh Boutique in Council District 18. Yes, Mr. Haggerty.
After further discussions with Ms. Hadley, she wishes for an indefinite deferral. She does not wish to lose the metered parking space for a loading zone.
Okay.
Move for indefinite deferral.
We have a first. Is there a second? Second. We have a first and a second. All in favor? Aye. Okay. Thank you. Item F, stop control removal, authorized removal of 2 stop signs on McCall Avenue at the intersection of Mimosa Drive, requested by Councilmember Welsh.
I'll move approval.
Okay. We have a motion to approve. Is there a second? Second. We have a first and a second, all in favor?
Real quickly, before we complete that vote, just, I didn't know if there was any, I mean, this is new business. Is there any staff reason not to do this? This is okay?
Well, with the discussion on multi-way stop warrants, we just wanted to ensure that there was discussion on this after, with the original agenda format.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
All right, we have a first and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, I think that wraps it up.
I will make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. We are adjourned.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.org.